Very few nations' rugby traditions can be summed up as succinctly in a story as Argentina's. During a match in Buenos Aires in 1890, a fight broke out. After a minute or two, the referee gave up trying to break it up. After a couple minutes more, he joined in. After a few more minutes, the police turned up and arrested not just the players on the pitch, not just the referee as well, but almost 2,500 spectators who'd all joined in, handbags swinging and tempers flaring. The only man present who wasn't arrested was a lightning-fast winger who fled the scene and outran the police, the fuzz eventually giving up on chasing him. Bravado and brutality, pace and power, incredible strength and remarkable skill, underpinned by a sensational shithousery, always in need of someone to just tell them to settle down. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Argentine rugby in a nutshell. Rugby in Argentina dates back to 1873, but you've actually got to go a few decades further forward than that before the sport starts being played by actual Argentines. The British expats who brought the sport over, learning their lesson from being battered by Fijians and keeping the game amongst themselves, like kind of racist children who won't play with kids from other classes. However, when rugby did start to spread, it was rife with paranoia. Then President Horace Selman frequently broke up rugby matches in the early 1890s, believing they were front for political meetings, not yet having realised that the idea of using rugby to spread political ideology is absurd and will never work. The Argentine national team went on to play their first game in 1910. Argentina then chugged along for some 40 years as rugby slowly seeped into their culture as a more bruising alternative to Big Brother football. Not so much a sport as a legal loophole that meant you could be as violent as you liked for 80 minutes a week and would only be arrested if the ref joined in. Then, in 1951, the South American Rugby Tournament was created, a name so beautifully taught it overtakes watching Worcester Warriors as the most bland thing in rugby. After winning the first 5 tournaments by an aggregate score of 362-9, Argentina started to be noticed. They arranged test matches against the big nations, France, Wales, and then, most importantly, South Africa. The Argentine tour of South Africa in 1964 was the moment rugby in Argentina became more than a good way to keep 30 bullies away from the city centre on a Saturday. Here was a tiny rugby nation headed to one of the sport's global superpowers, a side expected to smash them with just the kind of unpleasantness you expect from South Africans in the 60s. However, Argentina really stood up. They fought hard, defeating the Junior Springboks and returning home with 11 wins from 15 games. To give you a modern day equivalent, that's a bit like Spain turning up and beating all the South African Super Rugby teams. It was during this tour as well that the team gained the nickname the Pumas after the fact they have a jaguar on their jersey. It was a South African journalist who made a mistake that stuck in the days before YouTube comments were there to lovingly correct you on everything you ever do. That moment was pivotal for the Pumas, launching them forwards towards where they are today as a team that's qualified for every World Cup, making the quarterfinals for the first time in 1999 and only failing to escape the pools once since then, slipping up in a 1-point loss to Ireland in 2003. However, 4 years after that, Argentina really struck back. Drawn with host nation and Six Nations champions France and Ireland, who'd only missed out on that title on points difference by less than a try, Argentina turned up and decided to just play their own way. The opening night of a World Cup is normally a glitzy procession in which the opposition fights a bit, then rolls over and dies and just lets the home nation show off enough to get the fans in the nation to fever pitch. However, like a true cat of any kind, the Pumas weren't going to do what anyone asked. They beat France, then they waltzed through Ireland right into the quarterfinals. They then squeaked home against Scotland in the quarters, only losing to eventual winner South Africa on their way to a best ever finish of 3rd place. Next time in 2011, they then haunted the Scots again as they snuck into the quarters thanks to this incredible try by Lucas Gonzalez Amorosino and this blatant offside by Felipe Contepomi. And then in 2015, they went far again, tearing Ireland apart in the quarters and playing some beautiful rugby on their way to a semi-final knockout at the hands of Australia. Traditionally, Argentina are known as a hard scrummaging team of gnarly-nosed Hispanic granite men, but for almost 10 years now, they've been a team with the kind of mental sex rugby flair that probably requires a safe word. When it comes off, it's sublime. Forwards and backs linking like a spam bot without shame. Seemingly, Argentines just love to offload. Wherever and whenever they can. It doesn't matter if nobody's nearby, they'll offload anyway. Their pack is packed with super skillful ball players, but they often lack the wherewithal to know just where and when to use those skills. In the last World Cup, this was less of an issue, thanks to the likes of Juan Jose Imhoff and Santiago Cordero, men whose noses are ungnarled enough to be able to sniff tries from anywhere. Whilst Argentina's current wings, Batista Delgui and Ramiro Moyano, are extremely talented and phenomenally fun to watch, they lack the innate support line instinct of their 2015 compatriots. An instinct that turned Argentina from a team that was dangerous into one that was actually murderous. Speaking of murderous, Argentina's current coach is former world-class hooker Mario Ledesma, a man who looks like the kind of dad who'd yell, "Your boyfriend's here!" up the stairs whenever his son's male friend knocked on the door. After turning Australia into a team who could scrummage, apparently, in 2015, Ledesma became head coach of the Jaguares in Super Rugby and eventually Argentina last year, when struggling Daniel Hocade voluntarily stepped into the cage of big cats before he was pushed. Since taking over, Ledesma has served to strip Argentina back. The rugby they play is now far more simple, their structure is straightforward, the risk of overcomplicating everything considerably lessened. Under Hocade, Argentina played an incredibly fiddly style of rugby, which required passion and precision, when Argentina could normally only manage one of those at a time. Think of it as though Hocade was James Franco and Ledesma is Seth Rogen. Both are trying to achieve the same thing, making dumb jokes about willies and weed, or a quick offloading game based on forward dominance. But one is kind of upright and needlessly arty, so perhaps the highs are higher, but the other is focused on just having a good time, and that means you're less likely to end up having to watch a pile of shit as a result. Except, Mario Ledesma's idea of a good time isn't giggling with his friends, but a 7-hour scrum followed by a punch-up in a scrapyard. Whether this stripped-back game plan is something Ledesma intends to build on come the World Cup remains to be seen, but maybe it's just the logical thing to do to limit the amount his side have to remember, because this Argentine team is so chronically knackered, you worry they're about to nap on the pitch. Since being introduced to Super Rugby, virtually the entire Argentine team are spending so much time sat on planes, they're about to become the first people to complete Netflix. The Jaguares and Argentine teams are shifting time zones several times a week. This leads to enormous jet lag. Simply put, Argentina need to be the best conditioned team in the world to even play for 60 minutes, overcoming chronic fatigue that prevent most of us even pulling our shirts on every week. This perhaps explains Argentina's knack of peaking in World Cup years. Every single game they'll play in this year's World Cup will take place in Japan. No shifting time zones, no travelling massive distances, they're all in Japan. Argentina are actually set to arrive in Japan earlier than any other team, giving the side almost 2 weeks to adapt to conditions before the first game, which, wonderfully, is against the only team more unpredictable than them, their old rivals, Le Français. Because that's who Argentina are. They're unpredictable from minute to minute. They're a glorious clash of styles. A rugby oxymoron made up of a pack of bastards that could easily get themselves arrested and backs quick enough that watching them race qualifies as a car chase. Will they win the World Cup? Maybe. When Argentina have energy, they can tear teams apart. But even if they're turning up to play England, powered by purely caffeine and wanting to avoid that one thing they once saw Ledesma do when he was too many drinks in, there are going to be so many things to watch. Bravado and brutality, pace and power, incredible strength and remarkable skill. You've got no idea how it's going to go, but you can't take your eyes off it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Argentine rugby in a nutshell. That was part 9 in an ongoing series on all the teams in this year's Rugby World Cup, the 2019 Rugby World Cup. So there's obviously 11 more to go. We'll be going back. There'll be one more in 2 weeks' time. Next week, in between now and this time next week, there's a little rugby match that I like to call the final of the European Champions Heineken's Cups final. So I'll be covering that. I'll be looking into whichever way that game happens to go. I'll be trying to cover that. And then going back to the World Cup videos beyond that. So what remains to be said is thank you for watching this one, the Argentina look at. Thank you for watching the previous ones. They'll be floating up below me at some point soon. And thank you particularly to everyone that continues to support the channel on Patreon. It makes an enormous difference. It's the reason I'm able to make the videos in the sort of time frame I do and continue to put them out as I'm trying to do once a week at least at the moment, and did during the Six Nations. It makes an enormous difference to just me personally, my ability to make them while still putting the level of sort of quality, hopefully, in that I do. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that's watched through to the end of this video, which you haven't done quite yet. I've still got a few more words to say. Words like florgle and snort.